Hey everyone, I'm excited to be sharing this next episode of Conversations with Clinicians. This one is a special edition, including not just a spectacular clinician executive and healthcare leader, but also her non-clinician partner in crime. My guests today are Ami Parekh, the Chief Health Officer of Included Health, along with her friend, colleague, and peer, Robin Glass, Included Health's president. As many of us have experienced, these critical peer relationships across disciplines often have the most power to drive successful growth. Ami and Robin are quite a pair, and I am certain you will love our conversation. First, a little bit about Ami. As Chief Health Officer, she leads the strategy, operations, and quality for their national care solutions. She was formerly the CMO for population health and clinical integration at UCSF. She's also worked in consulting at McKinsey and in government on the Obama campaign's Health Policy Committee. She has an MD and a JD, both from Yale, and she did her medicine training at our common alma mater, Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Robin. Among many responsibilities, Robin leads sales and marketing, client and partnership success, and the overall growth strategy for the company. She was formerly the Chief Customer Officer at Evolent Health, and she brings such a cool background to her work, having studied public policy from Duke and having received her MBA and Master's in Public Administration from Harvard. Our conversation was so fun and so wide-ranging. You'll hear from Robin about how important it is to have Ami's voice at the executive table, not only as a clinician, but also as someone who's really thinking about the whole business. We'll talk about having a growth mindset, evolving your leadership style as you ascend in your career, and the alchemy of teams. We also discuss the hard stuff, managing hard moments together, especially ambiguity, and why Robin doesn't think of it as having to work with clinicians, but rather getting to work with clinicians. Everyone stands to learn something from this conversation, so let's jump in. Ladies, so excited to have you with me. This is so much fun. Ami and Robin from Included Health, thank you so much for joining this little endeavor of mine to highlight, as you both know, super clinical executives, Ami, but at the same time, super peers of our great clinician executives, because as you've heard me say, I think magic happens most when the two parties come together to really drive clinical outcomes and business growth. So I'm thrilled to have you both join me. So thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
So maybe we just dive right in. I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about the dynamic between the two of you. And so maybe tell me a little bit about what your roles really are and how you guys work together. And I'll have a ton of other questions as we go through, but as you know, this will be free-flowing and fun conversation. But maybe we start there because I think it's so exciting to see a duo or a dyad, or so I'd love to hear what you guys both do and how your roles really intersect with one another.
Yeah,
Great.
Robin, I'm gonna let you go first.
Okay, I'll start. So I'm Ami Parekh. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Chief Health Officer at Included Health. I've been here for nearly 6 years. And I do think there's no such thing as the same job description of a Chief Health Officer at any two companies. So I'll take a second to explain what Chief Health Officer means at Included Health. Here, I do lead our entire clinical team. So we are lucky to have about 1,000 clinicians on our team. That's everything from doctors to pharmacists to dietitians. And that operations of that team does sort of sit in my organization. And so there's a very operational component to being the Chief Health Officer here. But in addition to that, my job is to help us figure out what are the big next strategy moves that we need to make to drive value. And by value, what we mean is actually improving the health outcomes of the people we serve and doing that over time in a more cost-effective way for the purchasers of healthcare. And so that is really my accountability as an executive at Included. And in order to do that, I partner very closely with folks like Robin, and I'll give her a chance to explain her role, and then maybe we can talk about how we work together.
Awesome.
That's great. So yeah, I'm Robin Glass. I'm the president at Included Health. I use she, her pronouns as well. And my responsibilities are, really on a broad swath of the business aspects of what we do at Included Health. More specifically, I have responsibility for all of the client-facing and commercially oriented teams. So you can think of things like sales, marketing, client success, the partnerships we do with various influencers and channels for our business. And then I also have responsibility over the functions that manage the business aspects of our different offerings. So we have a general management team, we have a client insights team that does a lot of the reporting on behalf of our clients, and then marketing organization that really tracks kind of like the competitive landscape and does product marketing and focuses a lot on the value prop of our offering. And I've been with the company for 5 years and gotten to work very closely with Amy for the last 3 of those years as we came together through a merger, and just have really loved my experience working with Amy. I think what she said about having some operational parts of her role, but also like a really big focus on the strategy and the impact of what we do, that's like a really neat point of convergence in our 2 spheres. And so Amy and I spend a lot of time together.
I love it. Well, we'll have to tap into the merger topic at some point. Let's come back to that, because there's other dynamics involved there, right? And it's really great to see how the 2 of you have come together so nicely post merger, because that doesn't always happen. So that's also special. So maybe dig in then, like we've heard about both of your roles independently, but like where do those intersection points come, and how do you tend to have to work together or want to work together?
Yeah, I'll give it a go, and then feel free to chime in. So we have to work together, I would say, at all altitudes. And so let me start at the bottom, and then maybe I'll move up. There are strategic clients that the 2 of us partner together on, as we're both trying to explain what it is Included Health does, so that they consider having us as a key component of their benefit strategy, to how do we ensure this client is successful with us in the long term. And when our clients come to us with new problems to solve, often it's Robin and me together trying to figure out, well, how do we help you solve this problem? And both the figuring it out of it and the talking to the client together about it. So that's a super like micro example of how we just spending a lot of time together. And then there's the much bigger questions, right? Of, okay, now we're in a room together and trying to figure out a new channel strategy, or trying to figure out if we were to add a new type of offering to the composite of our services, how would that help us both in delivering outcomes and savings, which is probably where I start from, and in growing our business, which is where Robin often starts from. So it's both at the micro level on like day-to-day work, but also at the macro level at the company, that our 2 roles intersect relatively frequently.
Yeah, and I think what I would add is maybe to state something super obvious. We both are on the executive team of the company and report into our CEO, Owen Tripp. And we talk a lot about having a first team at Included Health. And so Amy and I are on that first team together, and just, we spend a lot of time together as an executive team each week, really touching base in all facets of the business. And one of the things I love about Amy as a clinical leader is she's not only a clinical leader, like she's like digging into the financial aspects of the business, thinking hard about where we're going on strategy, or really helping us to hone our approach to growth, all of these different things. And so it's in those kinds of settings where we spend a lot of time. And if I could say, I think it's so important to have that clinical voice in that room, and have it not be sort of like a one-dimensional version of that, have somebody like Amy who can think in a highly strategic and multifaceted way, but always kind of like keeping us centered on the clinical aspects of what we do, the individual who we serve, and the outcomes that we can drive.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's good to hear it from you, Robin, as well, right? Because I feel like we clinicians are over here going like, put us at the exact table, like please come to us. But to hear it come from your side of the table as the operator and, strategic leader, and to say, I need that clinical voice, and I need that clinical voice to also be able to speak my language to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Talking about finance or product or commercial, to be able to kind of bridge that, the languages that we all speak, right? It sounds like that's been quite powerful.
Yeah, I would say that to me is if speaking to the part of the audience here that is clinicians who want to make
Mhm.
impact, maybe through businesses, it is really important that you care about the business also.
Yeah.
Like, and it's not a fake it till you, like, it's not just to do it. It's you actually have to really care. And so, and you should probably figure out your why of caring. Like, I really care about growth. Robin has seen this piece of me come out, but I care about it because if we don't grow as a company, I don't get to make people better.
Yeah.
Period, full stop. And so I had to figure out my why of really caring. Similarly, I really care about profitability. But why do I really care about profitability? Because once we're profitable, we can control our own financial destiny and we can invest in the things that we want to invest in. So as if you're the clinician in the room and most of your colleagues are non-clinicians, which is, what it's mostly like, figuring it out your why of why you care about that part of the business is very important, because then you're going to be curious about it. You're going to want to learn more. You're going to get to know the language. Sometimes your curiosity might come across as a lot of questions, but it's coming from that intent of wanting to learn so that you can help and move the company forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And that comes through very clearly in the way that Amy shows up. I would also say you may be surprised to understand that the why behind a lot of the other members of your team are actually quite similar. So I think in the same way that a clinical leader can be sort of typecasted as only looking at the world through one lens, I think the same is true of other folks in the team. And that's like something that we've unpacked in our executive team, is that there's actually quite a bit of being motivated by the mission or the strategy or things like that across all of the different functional aspects of our executive team. So I think it's also important, if I were thinking of the clinical leader, to come into that without sort of like a preconceived notion of what motivates your colleagues, even though they've sort of selected different professions for themselves.
Yeah, that is such a wise perspective. Sorry, Amy, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just say one of the things, and I would say Robin is probably one of the most mission-oriented people on our executive team. So like it comes through in spades. But one of the things I always remind myself of is the folks who are not clinicians have still chosen to work in healthcare. And trust me, they had lots of other choices. They could have worked for a pure tech company. They could have worked for a retail company. They could have worked in so many other parts of our economy, and they chose healthcare. And there's usually a really strong why behind them choosing to use their skills in healthcare. And to Robin's point, like a few conversations and you're going to unwrap that. So it's really worth spending the time with your non-clinical colleagues to understand their why, because more often than not, it's going to be very aligned to why you became a clinician probably in the first place.
Yeah, so interesting. My guess is that well, I don't want to be biased and generalized here. We're talking about not being biased and generalizing. But yeah, we do come in with preconceived notions about both sides of the fence, right? And the expectation that a clinician is only going to think about the patient and can't think about finances or unit economics or ROI, and that the finance person or whoever is only going to think about their role with blinders on. But we found this at Able to as well. Like a lot of people were there for the mission. And you're right, they could have chosen to go anywhere. My whole data science team could have easily gone to Facebook or, Google or wherever, right? But they chose to be with us, and they had their reasons to be there, and that they brought that to their work too, which was great. Can you give me an example of like your CFO or somebody, pick somebody else on your team, right? Who you and how they show up bringing that why to their experience, maybe.
I mean,
I mean to pick on your
every one
CFO.
of
I
them,
have no idea who your CFO
they
is.
all like the hard thing is here is like picking one, if I'm being honest. So maybe I'll do like a couple of nuggets on each one, which sounds crazy. Our CFO is new, but I just met with him earlier today. And it shows up in that when we start to have a conversation about what we want to build next, it's very much oriented around the outcomes we can drive for patients, which maybe that may be atypical for a CFO in other places, but he doesn't go straight to like the P&L, which again, that's how it shows up for him. I can give you some examples on Robin, our CHRO. He wasn't in healthcare before he joined our company. He joined for the mission. And most people join after their own health experience, brought something up in their life where they want to make the experience better for others than either they or their loved one experienced. And that was a similar story. And it shows up in how he thinks about our team. Our head of product, she's been here a long time. She is the most member first person you will ever talk to. Anything you're bringing to her, she's going to ask, how does it impact the member first and foremost? And then our CEO, I mean, he is very mission oriented. He brought us all together. Obviously, he made the team. So, I guess as team captain, you get the joy of, or manager, maybe you put all the people together, and it really does start from him, and how he recruits and who he decides should be at the table. I don't know, Robin. I couldn't pick one. I was just like,
I think you captured it well. I mean, what I would just say is healthcare is super hard, right? Like some on your bad days, you're like, what if we were selling t-shirts and there were like 3 colors and 3 sizes? Like, this is a really complex business. And so I think there is kind of like the people that choose to be in it have to be in it for some part of the impact and mission. It's probably a pretty universal thing.
So, Amy, you just said this. You met with your CFO this morning, right? When a new clinician comes into a role or into a company, right? Part of like getting settled and getting sorted and figuring the business out and figuring your people out is getting to know those folks, right? So, but that doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes people do get kind of pigeonholed in their silos and they're focused on the thing they're focused on. I mean, how did you tackle it? And maybe Robin, as you joined, as the companies came together, there's some legwork that individuals have to do to really understand their peers to make for successful relationships. So, thoughts on how you did it and what you would recommend to an incoming clinical leader or a non-clinical leader who has to work with a clinician on building those bridges.
Yeah, Rena, I would say this is also an area where I've had to grow a lot professionally. If I think of myself 6 or 7 years ago and I think of myself today, I have learned that you have to prioritize the long-term relationship. And I think actually it sounds odd to say, like, as a clinician, I had to learn that, because I obviously knew that, like, in primary care, it's all about that long-term relationship with your patient. But actually, a lot of medicine and how you become a successful clinician is not based on long-term relationships. It's based on like taking care of the patient in front of you, driving the outcomes. Even as we think about the teams we form in medicine, they're often very short-term teams. Like, you're an attending with a resident, a couple interns for like 2 weeks at a time, month at a time, and then you're in a new team. And so really building and investing in the long-term relationship is something I would say I really sort of probably figured out a year or 2 into my journey, at what was then Grand Rounds, now included health. And it's very tangible things to do, right? It's like, have a weekly meeting with everyone on your first team. I know that might sound incredibly simplistic, but when things are busy, and they always are, if you're in a growth stage startup, that is an easy thing to stop doing. It is investing in getting to know somebody personally, not just professionally, like having a dinner with them, a meal. I'm like Indian, so I love sharing food with people, but like, sitting down at a table or going on a walk, spending time, not just at a desk, staring at a PowerPoint, is really important. Because as Robin mentioned, healthcare is really hard, and it's actually really long-term. None of us are going to get all the results we dream of in 6 months or a year. And so we're going to be working together for a long time. And you want to be able, when something's going wrong 18 months from now, if that relationship is solid, you can get through anything.
Yeah.
So it's a place of growth, I think, for me and for many clinicians. But it's really, really important.
Yeah, I'd love to build on that, because I totally agree with Amy's comment. I would say it's a place where we've invested mightily. So every Monday we're together for 3 hours, and most of the time we're all in person, which is a pretty substantial investment. We have people flying in for those meetings and things like that. And then we have the regular check-ins across the team. We also do an exec team offsite every 6 months where we're off somewhere for 2 or 3 days, really focusing on our team dynamics and the way we work together. And so that's a pretty massive investment that we make as a company. And parts of that have been doing exercises where we really talk about sort of like how each one of us is wired. We've done like a user manual type of thing, so that you understand how someone shows up when they're in their stress response, and how they like to communicate, and all of these things that if you don't have those explicit conversations, you can fill in the blanks in ways that are unproductive.
Right.
So I think really that very holistic way of building relationships and understanding of one another makes a big difference. It's funny, Amy referenced our CFO being new, and he was reflecting, I don't think he'll mind my saying, that he's getting used to like how much we share personally, like we come back from vacation and you show your pictures or what have you. And I think that's culturally part of how our team is wired, is to really build that connection at a pretty human level in addition to the work at hand. And I think that actually allows us to do the work more seamlessly and more effectively.
Yeah, that resonates. I mean, healthcare is a people business at every level. I
Yeah.
mean, us to work well for us to be successful in moving the needle in healthcare, we have to take that lens too. I'm like that. I love like knowing everything about everyone. And also because I think you find points of affinity just by scratching the surface. I love to play golf. Like it's like takes me 2 seconds to find another golfer, and then we talk about like last week's tournament and someone who missed a putt going up the stretch, right? Or maybe you ski, or maybe you love food, or maybe whatever. Like there's always something, and those bonds I think make for tighter working relationships. So I love that you talked about that.
And I think also just like understanding how someone's wired. And Amy, I hope you won't mind my using an example of you, but Amy is a voraciously curious person. She referenced this earlier, and she asked lots of questions. And we've all talked, together about how sometimes she's asking questions out of curiosity or in a brainstorming sort of mode, and like not to get defensive and worry that she's like trying to like pick apart what it is you're doing. And so she will, since we've talked about that and how it could be misunderstood, she actually says it up front. Like, here I'm asking for this reason, or I'm putting out an idea and brainstorming, and it's really helpful to sort of like understand how she's coming at something, and to have her have the self-awareness and the awareness of all of us to be really explicit about it.
That's so interesting. Yeah, our chief people officer had us do an exercise once, and out of that came this appreciation that we're all coming with positive intent. So I always hold on to that phrase, positive intent, because so often we make assumptions or fill in the holes. Like if you don't know a piece of someone's story, you're often ascribing some rationale, which may be incorrect, right? And so we sort of all came from the framing of, all right, like I'm just going to assume that you have good intentions here, and then we'll figure it out. But the sort of second step of the self-awareness to go, I'm asking now for X reason. Now I'm asking because I'm being critical, and I actually have some questions about like your approach. And now I'm asking from a learning curiosity vantage point. That's so cool. I mean, that takes some like self-work though. Like clearly that tells me you know yourself, Amy, and have done some of the introspection and the work to get yourself to a good working relationship with your peers.
Absolutely. I do think that is also a universal truth probably of our team. We sort of show up with a growth mindset, not just about what the impact we can have in healthcare is, but about ourselves. I do think we're all sort of constantly trying to be the next better version of ourselves. And if you believe that this is a team sport, which I 100% do, then unless you continue to work on how you work with others, you will not have the impact you want to. And both Rena and Robin, you know me, like my whole purpose is to have as much impact as possible. And so if you're not figuring out how you can better work with other people, you're just going to have the impact you want to have. So it's really important to invest in self-work, I think, and just be super honest with yourself. I know many clinicians like to get straight A's, and I probably sat in that bucket for a really long time. But when you're grading yourself, grade yourself honestly, because you can't improve if you're not being really honest with yourself. And so definitely, I strongly encourage, whether you're a clinician or non-clinician, if you're going to be a leader, it all starts with self-work, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And Robin's like really good at this stuff. Like she gave a leadership talk at one of our we brought our top 200 leaders together in New Orleans last year. She really pushed how I think people thought of themselves as leaders and where they needed to do their own work in order to be the leader they wanted to be.
Say more about that. I want to hear more about that.
Maybe I'll take that question. So we did this amazing thing, like Amy said, where we brought 200 senior leaders from the company, which is a pretty big size group of our team, to a 3-day offsite, and just invested in leadership development and building connections and things like that. And it was a really powerful session and lots of really good content. The talk that I gave was really on the notion of evolving your leadership approach as you ascend within your career. And this idea that one of the challenges of developing as a leader is that very often the things that make you successful enough to get into leadership are not the same skills that will ultimately propel you forward as a senior leader. And one of the examples that I think is germane to this conversation is I kind of went through 6 different examples of this, but one is the thing that oftentimes gets us to a senior spot is being a domain expert. So you're a clinician, you know your clinical field better than anyone. You are the go-to person that people call upon when they have questions and things like that. And so that's kind of like what gets you into a senior clinical role. But if you kind of like just keep playing that same tune of I am the domain expert in this one area, you're missing the chance to become someone who can wear a company hat and sort of look at things through this broader company lens. And so how do you transition from that initial spot to this other place? And one of the ways that I described it is, how do you become less predictable? So when you speak up in a meeting, you're at the exec team meeting and something comes up, you kind of like know what the predictable response will be from the clinical leader in the room. But if you're thinking in a more multifaceted way, the contribution that you make to any one discussion, and I see Amy do this all the time, could be really different. Like you may come at that from a more financially oriented position or something like that. So that's just one example of kind of like this evolution that I think leaders need to walk in order to really excel once they're in their leadership position.
Yeah, it's so wise. I love that. Personally, I felt like I had the most impact when I could sort of step above my silo and sort of see everybody else's and try to contribute. And I'm sure some of my ideas, they sort of fell flat, but you gotta, for me, I wanted to contribute as, I may have said this to you guys before in a prior conversation, but I wanted to be a healthcare executive who also happened to have clinical expertise versus a clinical subject matter expert, where my contribution always came through the lens of I'm a clinician, right? I wanted to come through the lens of I'm an executive for this company, and I also bring my clinical lens to bear.
And that's all of us to like, right? I'll use the CFO example or general counsel example. They also should, I think, if you're at the executive team, be a healthcare executive who happens to have a lot of legal knowledge. If you're the general counsel, or who happens to really have financial knowledge and acumen, if you're the CFO, or really know how to run a growth-oriented business, if you're the president, like that, or understand how to work with engineers, if you're the head of that department. So that sometimes as clinicians, we're like, I'm so unique. And turns out we're not. Like,
right.
Every executive is probably coming with their area of expertise, and they are there for the company. And so I think we should stop specializing ourselves so much.
I know.
We're not special.
Right? It's so funny. Like
We're
we are.
special, but not that
Yeah,
special.
you're special.
Yes.
I take issue with that comment.
Well, I was going to get there in a second, Robin. Yes, I think Amy is particularly special.
She
But it's
is.
it's a good reminder because the other thing that, like, as clinicians, and many of us who've made the leap have come from really great institutions, and we've like, we've gotten great grades, we have met all the criteria, we've won all the awards, right? And then you are put in a room with a whole bunch of other bright people. And I think it is, again, back to generalizing, but I do think a lot of people come from these generalized biased lenses. So it's fun to dispel those biases. But yeah, I think we still expect to be the smartest person in the room. And that is I think people have to sort that, right? There's a whole bunch of other people who are also the smartest person in the room for the things they're great at. And we have to also be able to tap into their expertise, learn from them, share our expertise, but also learn from the expertise of the folks at the table with us. We won't always have the answer. That's a
Yeah,
learning.
that's a profound comment. I think there's a lot to that. It reminds me of something that Amy and I have chatted about, which is if we're to get into like the real stuff of like where things get hard, I think that one of the strengths that makes clinical excellence is the orientation toward doing no harm. Like that's literally what people who become doctors and clinicians sort of like sign up for, is being really cautious about the impact on the human and ensuring that we're delivering the very best quality of care. And I think that that orientation overplayed can show up as like serious risk aversion,
Yeah.
new ideas and things like that. And so I think one of the places where the critical thinking, kind of like needs to be balanced with other things is really how do you still operate in an opportunity mindset and not sort of like go to like, oh no, here's what could go wrong. And so Amy and I, one of the things that we've worked through in our partnership, and even more so with our teams, is making sure that the clinical leadership is involved in things early enough that they can kind of like process through, well, here's the 3 things that worry me about this idea, and we can improve the idea as a result of that. And we can kind of like bring them along in the journey of ensuring that we're building something that will be, safe and effective and all of that for the people we treat, and also can accomplish all of the business objectives. And so I think that that way of the clinical voice showing up, where it can be a little bit more about mitigating risk, I think you have to be careful that you include it early enough, and also that the clinical leadership is sort of like occupies an openness to sort of getting past that. Amy, I don't know if there's anything you want to say on that, but I do think that that's a place where you show up with different orientations, everybody really smart and really expert at their thing, but you have to make sure that you kind of like build the alchemy of that combination in the right way.
Such a good word.
I
love
know.
it.
I was just noticing that. It's like, good
I'm
word.
storing that one away. Alchemy. I like it. I like it. Yeah. And I'll add, and Amy, I want to hear your thoughts here too, right? I think knowing how people show up, right? Back to your original topic of understanding people's perspectives and how they present. But as clinicians, I think as non-clinicians, knowing that like that's how we're trained to do and to be appreciative of that's the lens from which I'm coming. As the clinician, I think it's also important to know like what are non-negotiables, and okay, fight for the things where like risk really matters and you really can't do any harm, but know where the line is drawn and where, some things have to be A+ and some things can be a B. But I think sometimes people forget like there's a line and you got to decide which things have to be A+ and do no harm and which things are flexible. And that's a learning. So Amy, anything to add?
What I was going to add is one of the places that we as an executive, 2 places where we as an executive team spend a lot of time that helps us manage some of these hard moments is on aligning on our values. And we actually came up with our values by thinking about what are the values of us personally in some ways, and how does that become the company values, and in our leadership competencies. And there's one that this risk aversion, risk leaning thing always pops up. It's managing ambiguity, actually. And if I think about clinicians, sometimes we struggle to manage ambiguity because a lot of our job was actually trying to sift away the ambiguity for our patient in front of us and help them figure out the next step, right? Like that's kind of your job as somebody's doctor. You're like, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of gray in medicine. I know people like to believe it's all scientific, but there's a lot of art.
100%.
And your job as a doctor is to walk your patient through that in a way that feels like controlled, helpful, and they're in the leader role. And so as a leader, when ambiguous things come up, sometimes your instinct is the same. It's like, how do I sort of eliminate this ambiguity so we can move forward to the next step? And by the way, that's not a bad thing, but it is something that I think as we grow as leaders, as opposed to clinicians, we really have to work through. And that's where some of this risk aversion sort of pops up, I think, sometimes. But the really spending time on that being one of the key leadership competencies for us as a company, how do you manage ambiguity?
Yeah.
I think it's helpful. And we hold all our leaders to the same competencies, whether you're in Robin's organization or Amy's organization. If you're a leader, these are the competencies. So all of my clinicians have to learn in this one too.
Yeah. And be okay with that discomfort of not knowing the right answer all the time.
Yeah. And that there's a thread I want to pull on there with what Amy just said, which is each of us, we've talked about in a leadership team, are different and wired differently. And yet we sort of evolve to be a more expansive version of ourselves so that we can see it from each other's vantage points. Another thing that makes each one of us different is the kind of teams we lead. And so I think having an awareness of it's really different to be in the position of managing a workforce of engineers as it is a workforce of therapists or salespeople, and so you kind of come into that space as an executive team representing these teams and needing to serve them in different ways and to manage change or ambiguity or something like that with them in a different way. And so I think it just helps you to understand your peers to really be able to put yourself in the mindset of what it feels like to stand up in front of their all hands meeting and respond to the kinds of folks that are in that setting and the way that they think about the world based on what their job is every day.
Absolutely. It's such a great observation. We could talk for hours.
I know we could.
Honestly, I have a whole list of questions, but we've talked about a lot of things that have gone well. And I mean, you're describing a lot of depth and work behind getting it to a point where the teams function well. And, I think hearing that is so great. Maybe we can flip to some of the challenges that you face, because you've clearly done hard work to get to good, which hints that there must have been times when things weren't as easy. And so you had to do that hard work. If you don't mind, like sharing maybe some challenging moments in either your relationship or your relationships with others in the company or prior lives and how you overcame them.
You want to start, Robin? Or
yeah, I think I alluded to this earlier, but I feel like some of the harder moments that we've had have been times where, say we're working on a new product offering, or we're working on a specific deal with a client, and we've gotten kind of like far down the road within my organization and maybe even within the product organization on a solution. And the clinical organization has said, hey, wait a second, like this doesn't make sense. This isn't, this isn't appropriate. And we've had to do some like serious backtracking to say, okay, they probably should have been in these conversations a long while ago. And how do we hear their feedback and incorporate it, even if we're sort of like decently far down the road, maybe even having already communicated some parts of that to a customer or something like that. And I think some of that is just unintentional, like everybody going fast and things like that. And then part of it is this work of figuring out the dyad part of how does the clinical and the business come together in a really productive way. And so if like our worst versions of ourselves are a clinician is so dug in on exactly how this has to be clinically pure that there's like sort of like in the department of no, and the business person wants to close the deal so badly that they're kind of like charging forward without taking into account, real considerations for the patient or for the health of the business or something like that. And that's not how we show up. That's sort of a caricatured version of it. But I think a milder version of that leads to not building the alignment early because you kind of like just want to get something through or something like that. And so I feel like some of the harder conversations that Amy and I have had to have, or that I've had with Amy's team or something like that, are moments where the clinical leadership feels like they should have been involved sooner than they were. And yet you also have to build kind of like the agility to get things done. And so you can't involve everybody. So sort of like figuring out what the right balance is there.
Yeah.
That to me is like the hardest stuff I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another time things get hard, and I think we've done a lot of learning on this, is we are a company where if there's a fire, we all go and try to get rid of it. So we are like, no, there's nobody in this company who's like, not me. Like we're
Yeah.
actually, like, if there's a problem, we all want to get in, and we are fixers, which is a much better state than if nobody wants to fix the problem, by the way. But what that means is when things go wrong, and they will in any organization that's trying to do good work, like, you're not meeting all your operational goals, or there's just stuff that goes wrong. Everyone leaning in at once can lead to not being in the right formation or not knowing what the formation is. So redundant work, misaligned work. And so I think we've learned, because when there were fires, we were like all getting in, all with great intent. And I think we always had that going for us, but maybe not in the most effective way, like working together and then sort of taking a step back and be like, what is the right formation? Who really is the accountable party to make sure this whole thing goes right? Who's responsible? Who are consultants, but they're not owning, they're just here to help. Like thinking through the right formation really helps sort of get unlocked when there is something that needs to be fixed. And I think we've taken that approach forward of like being really clear on accountabilities and responsibilities before things get too far out, and then everyone's sort of doing everything.
Yeah, it's so true, Amy. And it kind of makes me think of like the versatility part that makes the magic of our executive team. The strength overplayed is then people feel like they can chip in on all these things that are maybe not clearly in their swim lane. And so then building role clarity becomes that much more important.
Yeah. Yeah. All of those examples were things we felt and had to overcome. So they resonate deeply, especially Robin, you're full of a team marching forward, clinicians maybe coming to the table a little bit later, a lot of feeling of resentment and maybe disrespect even, that like they weren't brought to the table earlier, but like but exactly what you described, the intentions were good, moving fast here.
Yeah.
But early and often alignment between clinicians and everybody else was key, and building that early, and then ideating together, building together. This is especially on the product side. And Pete Shalick, who was our chief product officer, and I did a fun podcast for A16Z last year, where we talked about this in depth, the challenges we face and exactly what you're describing and how we had to figure out how to come together, and did successful, but not without a lot of pain and some, blood, sweat, and tears along the way.
Well, it's good to know we're not alone.
You are not alone. That resonates.
Yeah.
Certainly does. So yeah, just in the interest of time, I want to make sure we get on a couple of other things. So we've talked about a bunch of these things, but there is a sense of uniqueness and specialness in what you all have built, included, which I think are pillars, for us to emulate. But pulling it back to generalizing a bit, like, what do you think, and maybe Amy for you and Robin, like as a clinician trying to become a clinician leader, executive in a healthcare business, what are some of the qualities or skills that like tangibly you would say, even if you're, and maybe especially if you're not in an environment that is as rich and special as included, that you would say, are key to have or to learn to be
Yeah.
successful in this world?
And probably qualities and skills might feel a little different. I think from a qualities perspective, I always go back to the like hungry, humble, and smart. And it's really, are you humble? And I think that's the one that, if I'm being snarky, I'd probably say like clinicians sometimes struggle with. Like, and to the point of humility comes with curiosity. In my mind, it's like, the world is vast and there's a lot I don't know. And I admit that every single morning. And the cool thing is there's a lot more to learn. And so I think if you're a clinician, I would just say, really check yourself on that one. Like, are you entering humble and are you entering curious to any sort of space you're entering? Are you hungry? Like, are you really in it to like fix the big problem? Because I think sometimes we're like, but we've already worked so hard. We went through med school. We went like, and in some ways you're right. Like there is no such thing as working harder than your intern year, probably as a clinician, like in terms of pure blood, sweat, and tears. And you will work just as hard as an executive leader in just a very different way. But it is that hard. And so you kind of have to be hungry for the resultant outcome if you're going to be successful, I think. And then that smart, it's not about actual like brain smarts. It's about like people smarts. It's, can you read the room
Yeah.
before, like, in almost now you kind of have to read the virtual room. Like, do you see someone come off mute or they're about to speak, but then they don't? Robin's like really good at this. She's like, you look like you were about to say something. What was that? And so I always think about those as like the core qualities that will enable you to be a leader in anything. And then in terms of skills, I was very lucky, and this is probably unique and not everyone can go out and do this stuff, but I was a management consultant. I did go to law school. I did build up like hard skills of like, how do you make a business case? How do you present a slide deck? Let's talk about strategy. How do you think about regulatory complexity? So I had the opportunity over my career before entering this space to build a lot of hard skills. And if you're a clinician who hasn't had those opportunities, it might be worth exploring, are there ways for you to get that, whether it's business school or some time in consulting or spending time, learning and talking. It's that curiosity coming out again of changing healthcare will require a lot more than just clinical expertise. We're going to need people who think about business models. We're going to need people who think about laws and regulations. And you kind of have to understand those languages to be effective, I think. So go out and
dig in there before, Robin, I give you a chance to comment too. So I get this question a lot, Amy, and you probably do too from clinicians kind of coming up. Should I go to business school? Like where, I think there was a question of like, where could people learn those skills? I felt like I got an MBA on the job and had sort of ferocious curiosity and enough comfort in my own, like in what I had accomplished to date to feel like, well, look, I'm not dumb. I know a lot. I just don't know that. Like, I don't know what ROI means in this context. I don't know what COG stands for. But so I felt like I could learn on the job. But yeah, I mean, I guess what would you say to that? I mean, should people go get formal training, or can they learn on the job, or is it dependent on the situation?
Very dependent on you. Like, I think it's knowing yourself. I think I learn on the job. If I'm like, I learned a lot in med school, but I probably learned way more in residency. I did learn a lot in law school, but I learned a lot more on the Obamacare. Like, I actually find myself to be a person who learns almost more like an apprentice. Like, I like to get in there, and that's how I learn. But actually, that's not all learning types. Like, I think just knowing how you learn, and for some people, having the formal education really would enable them, I think, to then learn faster when they're in an organization. So I think this is some of that self-work. Like, you kind of need to know yourself, and business school is a big investment. So before you're going to go spend all that money and time, like, make sure you kind of know what you want to get out of it.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Robin did go to business school, so she should probably answer this one.
I mean, I went to business school. I did a joint program, so I studied policy as well, and I'm super grateful that I did it. I think it's like a almost like a luxury that I got to spend that time just learning and building the relationships that have propelled a whole bunch of aspects of my life since, including my career. And I think that there's a bit of a trap there of just like box checking and sort of like thinking somehow just going to business school or getting a degree or something like that is gonna make you a certain type of thinker or professional. And I think in some ways it's a little bit more of a vehicle for doing a career pivot or building a network that opens doors that would otherwise not be available to you, more so than the content of the program, and maybe even more so than the credentials that the program comes with. And so I think when people ask me, you know, for career advice about whether they should go to grad school, I'm not always pushing them in that direction, especially something like business school or law school, unless they have like a really concrete reason why they think something about that's going to allow them that transition within their career. Because I do think that it comes more from how you approach your work than what's on your resume kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree completely. Robin, for you, obviously the reason to bring the both of you to this conversation is that, you know, both parties really have to come together to make a company successful, right? A clinician, leader, healthcare executive with clinical expertise and a non-clinician. So what advice would you give to the non-clinicians, like yourself, who have to work closely with clinicians, right? And ensuring that that's a successful partnership. Like maybe we talk qualities and skills for the clinician, but what are the qualities and skills that, you know, a non-clinician needs to bring to that relationship to make it successful?
Yeah, I would start off by changing your language a little bit if I could, and say get to work with clinicians as opposed to feeling like you have to. And
well put.
I mean, and that's not just to be nitpicky, but more to say that the mindset that you take into the work
Yeah, I
with a
appreciate the shift
clinician
in language.
leader is just like, it's such a amazing thing to get to work closely in an entrepreneurial pursuit of some sort, and that could be at various stages of a business, with somebody who is so deeply steeped in the clinical aspect of the work. You know, it's like I will never ever understand the science or the medicine of a lot of the work that I do, but I've obviously chosen to be in a field where we're in the business of healing and helping people to be well. And so it's like so cool to work with someone like Amy, who understands that at all of these like very deep levels, and then also to not approach her as someone who only thinks about this clinically, but really embrace the breadth of the way that she comes at the work. And so I think the main thing, which is pretty consistent with what we've been talking about today, is to just come at that with an open mind. And I believe that like the most underrated leadership quality is listening. And so really coming in with curiosity, as Amy said, and with like a truly open ear to listen to a different perspective and to see the opportunity and sort of like advancing your own thinking and advancing the organization as a result of that. So super simple, but that's what comes to me.
That's great. I appreciate it. I have like 500 additional questions to ask you guys, but we might have to do a part 2 one day to just get
Can we do a follow-up?
everything else, right? But maybe, I mean, there's so much I want to talk about. We might have to do a part 2. In the last waning minutes of our time together, you know, something I might not have asked you I mean, there were things we were going to talk about that I haven't asked you, but like, what's a pressing topic that you just want to get out there, something you want to communicate to the clinician leaders or the non-clinician leaders that might be listening in?
Mine would be, this is going to sound strange, just do it. Like, I think if you're a clinician leader or a non-clinician leader thinking about, hey, do I want to be a healthcare executive beyond just the clinical, or do I want to make an impact in a company that's growing? I hope the answer is yes, because yes, it's hard. yes, it's complicated. Like relationships are never easy. If they were, like, there's lots of books that would have never been written. And it's all worth it because I think there's so much to do to make healthcare better for the people we love and the people we serve. That I just hope people are brave and they actually do the work, because there's so much impact we can have.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that's a good note to end on.
Be brave. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. My favorite advice, which I think dovetails on what Amy said perfectly, the best advice I ever got was actually from a business school professor, and it was to go to that which makes you uncomfortable. And I think that's kind of the spirit of what we're talking about here is to put yourself out there, to dive into things that you maybe don't know a ton about, and to be vulnerable and learning from your peers who maybe have something to contribute to that process. Yeah.
Such great words of wisdom to end on. Thank you both. I definitely think we might need to do a part 2 because, yeah, there were so many great topics. I mean, women in leadership and, how to live life and your families. I know you guys live full lives outside of your work. So there's so many other topics we could have touched on, but just a huge thank you. It's just fun to hear what you've built at Included and the relationship between the two of you and with your peers. And I think it's a model for others as we're trying to support other clinician leaders and frankly just healthcare executives broadly, right, to do more innovation and to advance the needle. I mean, we need more relationships like yours. So I appreciate you guys coming to chat.
Thanks, Rena, for this opportunity. This was like super fun for us. So
Yeah.
I mean, we don't usually spend an hour talking about our relationship.
This is
this
like
is really
couples therapy for you.
Yeah,
Because you needed it, right?
We need another installment of couples therapy. Thank you so much. This has been like a real honor to be here. And there's nothing I prefer more than teaming up with Amy and sharing the stage with her. So thanks for the chance to do that today.
Thanks to you both.
Bye.